The plan was simple. Surprise Sarah, sweep her off her feet. 10 years together should mean something, right? I'd spent weeks organizing everything in secret, booking the table at our favorite spot, a quiet little cafe tucked down an alley, hidden from the noise of the city. I knew she'd love it, or at least I thought I did. As I stepped into the cafe that evening, the first thing I noticed wasn't her laugh or her smile, but the way her hand was resting on someone else's shoulder. A man, sitting far too close to be a friend. I'd recognize that posture anywhere. The way she tilted her head, leaning in as if she were drinking him in, inhaling his scent like he was the only person in the world she wanted near her. It was a quiet, steady intimacy, and she was lost in it. I stood there, feeling my whole body go still. She hadn't seen me yet, hadn't even sensed my presence, which, for some reason, made it hurt even more. She was so absorbed in him that I was completely invisible. And there was this look in her eyes, like she was alive in a way I hadn't seen for years. I don't know what came over me, but I felt my feet moving. My body felt like it was acting on its own as I approached them. The small box in my hand felt suddenly heavy, like it was full of stones. This was supposed to be her gift, a reminder of everything we'd been through together. But now, in this moment, it felt like a joke. When I reached the table, I cleared my throat softly. She jumped, her head snapping up to meet my gaze, and her face paled. I saw her fingers jerk back from his shoulder as if she'd been burned, but I could see it in her eyes, the panic, a flicker of fear, and then she masked it, quick as a flash, replacing it with something like defiance. "Tom," she said, her voice steady but quiet, her hand slowly retracting as she shifted in her seat. The man beside her looked at me with raised brows, but there was a smugness there too, like he knew exactly what was happening and was waiting to see how I'd handle it. Ignoring him, I placed the box on the table in front of her. "Happy anniversary," I said, my voice colder than I'd expected. It wasn't a greeting. It was a declaration, a challenge. For one insane second, I almost hoped she'd laugh, that she'd tell me this was some kind of cruel joke. But the silence between us grew thick, and when she didn't speak, I turned and walked away. I left the cafe, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened pressing down on me. The air felt sharper, colder, biting into my skin as I walked aimlessly down the street, barely registering the people moving past me. The gift I'd set on the table, my little box of promises, seemed like some sort of cursed relic now, a reminder of how blind I'd been. I thought I knew her. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I already knew it would be her. It was one word: wait. Against my better judgment, I stopped and leaned against a lamppost, waiting. I didn't even know what for. A part of me wanted her to run after me, to explain it away, to make it sound like nothing. Or maybe I just wanted to see if she'd have the guts to lie to my face. After what felt like forever, I saw her walking up the street, her face tight, mouth set in a grim line. She stopped a few feet in front of me, looking me over with a strange mixture of guilt and something that almost looked like irritation, like I was the one out of place, not her. "What the hell was that, Tom?" she asked, crossing her arms over her chest. Her tone was quiet but defensive, like I was the one who'd interrupted her night. "What was that?" I repeated, feeling anger start to bubble up under my skin. "That's my question, Sarah. Who was that guy? And what exactly was going on back there?" She rolled her eyes, which caught me off guard. I expected some attempt at an apology, maybe a denial, but she looked annoyed. "That was just a friend from work. We were catching up, that's all." She shrugged, as if her answer should be enough to erase the image of her practically melting into his shoulder. "I don't see what the big deal is." "Catching up," I repeated, feeling like I was losing my grip on reality. "Is that what you call it now? You looked like you were one breath away from climbing into his lap." She scoffed, glancing away from me and shaking her head. "You're being dramatic, Tom. We were just talking. It's not my fault you decided to sneak up on us and make it weird." I blinked, processing her words. Sneak up on us. Like I'd done something wrong by simply walking into a place I had every right to be. She was trying to turn it on me, to make me look like the one who was overreacting, maybe even paranoid. The gaslighting was almost impressive in its audacity. "You didn't even see me?" I said quietly, my voice a mix of frustration and disbelief. You were so wrapped up in him, you didn't even know I was there until I practically dropped that gift on the table. She sighed, finally dropping the defensive edge, replacing it with what looked like an attempt at exasperated patience. Tom, you're reading way too much into this. I didn't know you were coming, and yes, I was focused on talking to him. That doesn't mean anything. I shook my head, clenching my fists at my sides to keep from shouting. Just a friend, huh? Then why did you look so guilty when I walked up? Why the panic? Her jaw tightened, and for a split second, I saw something raw in her eyes. Something she didn't want me to see. But she quickly smothered it, replacing it with a thin, tight smile. I felt guilty because I knew you'd get like this. I know how jealous you get over nothing. The word stung like a slap. She was trying to make me doubt my own eyes, my own instincts, trying to twist the knife and make this entire nightmare my fault. And for a second, I almost fell for it. I stared at her, struggling to piece together the woman standing in front of me with the woman I thought I knew. Jealous? Sarah, I just watched you clinging to some guy like he was all that mattered in the world. You can't stand here and tell me that was innocent. She exhaled, visibly annoyed, glancing away like she wished she were anywhere else but here. I don't know what you want me to say, Tom. You're overreacting. I told you it was just a conversation. If you can't trust me, that's on you. There it was, the challenge like a line drawn in the sand. She was daring me to accuse her, to admit I didn't believe her. Her deflection was so blatant it was almost insulting, but the look in her eyes told me she believed she could talk her way out of this. Maybe she had before and I just never saw it. Trust you. I could feel my voice rising, fueled by months of doubts I'd pushed aside and tried to ignore. You know, I was so blind to this. I ignored every sign. I actually thought it was me, that maybe I wasn't doing enough to make you happy. But then I saw you, Sarah. I saw the way you looked at him. Don't stand here and act like I'm imagining things. Her expression shifted. A fleeting look of anger and then boredom? She glanced at her watch, a movement so dismissive it hit me like a punch to the gut. Look, Tom, I'm not in the mood for some big scene right now. I had a long day, and I don't have the energy for your insecurities tonight. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder, like she was ready to leave, like I was just another errand she wanted to check off her list and be done with. It was unbelievable, but in that moment, I saw just how deeply I'd underestimated her. Here I was, struggling to process the betrayal I just witnessed, and she was annoyed, like I was inconveniencing her with my hurt, my questions. She didn't even have the decency to pretend to be remorseful. Wow, I said, my voice shaking with anger. This is just unbelievable, Sarah. You're standing here, lying to my face, and you don't even care enough to pretend you feel bad. Her eyes narrowed, and she gave a slight, bitter laugh. You know what, Tom? Maybe I don't feel bad. I've spent years tiptoeing around your jealousy, your constant need for validation, for me to prove myself to you. If I want to spend time with a friend, I don't see why that has to be a federal case. A friend, I said, my voice cracking on the word. You looked at him like he was the most important person in the world. And here I am, just some background character in your life. She rolled her eyes, looking away as if she couldn't bear to meet my gaze. You always exaggerate, Tom. I was having a drink with a friend, and you've turned it into some big betrayal. Her voice was cold now, flat, as if she'd completely checked out of this conversation, out of our marriage. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. Just answer me honestly, Sarah. Is there something going on between you two? Just say it. Have the guts to admit it. For a second, something flashed in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or guilt. But just as quickly, she blinked, covering it up with that same infuriatingly calm mask. This conversation is over, she said, her voice chillingly calm. I don't have to stand here and defend myself to someone who doesn't trust me. And just like that, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving me standing there on the sidewalk, her words echoing in my head. I felt sick, unsteady, like the ground had just shifted beneath my feet. The realization hit me all at once. She had no intention of coming clean.
No remorse, no regret.
Whatever she was hiding, she planned to take it with her. She'd already decided this wasn't worth her time. And for the first time, I wondered if she'd ever truly cared at all. The next day, the silence between us was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. She didn't text, didn't call, didn't even leave a note when she left the house that morning. Like she wanted to leave everything unspoken, wrapped up and neatly tucked away, as if nothing had happened. But I wasn't letting this go. Not after the look on her face last night, the way she'd practically shrugged me off. I'd spent the night thinking, piecing together months of odd behavior, things I'd dismissed as quirks or passing moods. The sudden work trips. Her phone she'd started keeping face down all the time. The private messages she'd quickly closed whenever I walked by. It was like all the puzzle pieces had finally come together, and I couldn't believe how many of them I'd ignored. But last night had changed everything. I needed answers, proof that I wasn't losing my mind. After she left for work, I went to her side of the dresser, to the drawer where she kept her things. I hated myself for going through her belongings, but there was no other way to get to the truth. Inside, there was nothing obviously suspicious, just her usual things. But then I found a small velvet box shoved toward the back of the drawer. It was unfamiliar, something I knew I hadn't given her. I opened it, and inside was a delicate bracelet with a small engraving. Always. Just that word, but it was enough to make my stomach twist. I knew it wasn't for me, and I'd never heard her mention it before. It didn't take much to connect the dots, and the thought of that guy giving her this made my skin crawl. Suddenly, I needed to know more. I went to her phone, which she'd left in the kitchen charging. A rare slip-up. Unlocking it felt wrong, but the need to know outweighed any hesitation I had. It only took a minute to find the messages, and when I did, my hands went cold. There were weeks' worth of texts, all from a number saved under a harmless-sounding name, Jules' work. But the messages weren't about work. They were far too personal, with good morning texts and late-night chats, plans to meet up, coded language that left just enough unsaid to give them an excuse if they were ever found out. They'd met in places I'd never even heard her mention before, little tucked-away bars and cafes where they could disappear together. And then I found it. A photo she'd sent him just last week, one I'd never seen before. She was sitting in a dimly lit restaurant, the same one I'd seen her in with him the night before, smiling at the camera in a way she hadn't smiled at me in years. She looked different, like she was someone else entirely. Happy, free. I closed the phone, the weight of everything settling onto my chest like a boulder. There was no denying it now, no rationalizing it away. She had an entire life I knew nothing about, a version of herself she'd hidden from me with a precision that was almost chilling. I felt sick, my hands shaking as I tried to breathe through the weight of betrayal, the sick realization that this had probably been going on for months, right under my nose. I sat down, the bracelet in one hand, her phone in the other, replaying last night's confrontation in my mind. All her dismissive words, the way she'd turned it around on me, making me feel like the paranoid one. I'd let her gaslight me. I'd believed her lies because I wanted to trust her. And the worst part? She'd almost gotten away with it. This wasn't just some fling. This was a carefully hidden, ongoing affair with meetings, gifts, secrets they shared. She'd kept it from me with a straight face, holding her head high, daring me to question her. I didn't know what hurt more. The lies, the betrayal, or the fact that she'd looked me in the eyes every day and pretended she still loved me. I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. There was only one way this was going to end, and it would end on my terms. By the time Sarah got home that evening, I had decided how this was going to go down. No more passive questions, no more giving her chances to twist the truth. I wanted her to look me in the eye and admit it. I needed to hear her say it, to feel that final, sharp edge of betrayal. I couldn't let her play this off any longer. When she walked in, she looked surprised to find me waiting in the living room, sitting calmly, like I was expecting her. She paused in the doorway, her eyes flicking over me with a hint of nervousness. There was no friendly greeting, no attempt at a casual conversation. Just her, standing there with her bag still in hand, trying to gauge my mood. "Hey," she said finally, setting her bag down on the floor. "You look serious." I motioned to the seat across from me. "Sit down, Sarah. We need to talk." She hesitated, glancing at the seat like it was a trap. I could see her thinking it over, weighing her options. Then she sighed, rolling her eyes a little as if she were indulging me. She lowered herself into the chair, crossing her legs and folding her hands on her knee, trying to look as composed as ever. "All right, Tom," she said, her voice just barely masking her irritation. "What's this about?" I watched her, studying every twitch of her expression, every small gesture. "I think you know exactly what this is about," I replied, keeping my voice steady. I wasn't going to let her sidestep this one. She held my gaze for a long moment, then leaned back, her lips pressing together. "If this is about last night, I already told you." "This isn't about last night," I interrupted, feeling the anger slip into my voice. "This is about Jules." Her face went blank. For the first time, I saw real fear flash across her eyes. She covered it quickly, but it was there, just for a second, a moment of raw panic. Then, like clockwork, she shifted her expression, hardening her features, pulling herself together. "What about Jules?" she asked, her voice cool but forced. I pulled out her phone from my pocket and held it up for her to see. "I read your messages, Sarah. I know everything. You don't need to lie anymore." Her face flushed, and her eyes darkened as she looked at the phone, like it was a weapon turned against her. I watched her as she processed what I just said, as she searched for something, anything, that might keep her lie intact. "You went through my phone?" Her voice was low, incredulous, more offended than apologetic. "I can't believe you would invade my privacy like that. That's disgusting, Tom." She was grasping at straws, lashing out to turn it around on me, to make me look like the one in the wrong. I'd half expected it, but hearing her blatant attempt at deflection, her complete lack of remorse, sent a surge of anger through me. "Don't even try that," I snapped, my voice cutting through her feigned outrage. "You can play the victim all you want, but I saw the messages, Sarah. The plans, the work dinners, the photos. I know about the bracelet. I know exactly what you've been doing." Her face fell, her mask slipping again as she realized she couldn't talk her way out of this one. She sat there, silent for a moment, her jaw tight, her hands clasped in her lap. And then, slowly, she leaned forward, her expression changing from shock to something colder, something almost triumphant. "Fine," she said, her voice dropping to a low, mocking tone. "You know what? Yes, I've been seeing Jules. And you want to know why?" She tilted her head, her lips curling into a bitter smile. "Because you stopped being interesting, Tom. You stopped making me feel alive. So yes, I found someone else who did." Her words hit me like a blow, but I forced myself to keep my composure, to stay calm even as the finality of her admission tore through me. I could feel my hands shaking, but I clenched them into fists, forcing myself to keep steady. "So, that's it then?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "After everything, after 10 years, this is how it ends?" She looked at me, unblinking, her expression flat, almost relieved. "Maybe it was over a long time ago, Tom. Maybe we were both just pretending." Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with a truth I didn't want to face. And as much as I wanted to yell, to scream, to make her feel even an ounce of the pain she'd put me through, I felt nothing but emptiness. She rose from the chair, grabbing her bag, her movements calm, collected, as if she'd been planning for this moment all along. And for the first time, I realized she had. The sound of her heels against the hardwood echoed as she walked toward the door, her posture unbothered, like we'd just wrapped up a business meeting, not the unraveling of our entire marriage. I watched her, stunned, as she adjusted her bag over her shoulder, not sparing me a single glance. She'd said her piece, dropped her bombshell, and now she was done. But I wasn't. "Where are you going?" I asked, forcing steel into my voice. She paused, turning back with a calm, almost amused look. "I don't know, Tom. I don't have anything more to say to you. So that's it," I said, a strange, unfamiliar calm settling over me. "You're going to walk out of here like none of this matters? Like I don't matter?" She gave a small, bitter smile. "If you mattered, Tom, you wouldn't be standing here begging me for answers. You'd already know them." The words cut deep, but her tone had an edge to it, almost like she wanted me to break down or lash out, to give her an excuse, a reason to make this all my fault. She wanted a reaction. some messy, emotional outburst she could point to as proof that she'd been right to do what she'd done. But I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Instead, I took a steadying breath, forcing myself to meet her gaze without flinching. "You're wrong, Sarah. I do know the answers now," I said, keeping my voice level. "And the answer is that you've been lying for months, hiding your affair, lying to my face. And now, when it's all out in the open, you can't even pretend to care about what you've done." Her eyes narrowed, a flash of irritation breaking through her mask of indifference. "This again? Tom, I've already told you. I moved on a long time ago. You can try to make this all about my betrayal. But the truth is, we stopped being a couple a long time ago. You just didn't want to see it." I felt my hands clench, and this time, I didn't stop the anger rising in my voice. "Oh, I saw it, Sarah. I saw every single sign, and I ignored them because I wanted to believe in us. I wanted to believe we were stronger than some meaningless fling. But now, standing here, watching you throw all of this away like it's nothing, I realize I was wrong. You never believed in us." She scoffed, dismissively waving a hand. "Believe in us? Stop trying to make this a fairy tale, Tom. People change. I changed. I just grew out of you, and you never saw it coming." She shrugged, as if the last 10 years were just a phase she'd outgrown. As if our marriage had been nothing but some comfortable habit she could drop whenever it no longer suited her. Her coldness struck something deep in me, but instead of breaking down, it sparked a strange sense of clarity. This woman standing in front of me, with her icy expression and her casual cruelty, wasn't the woman I'd married. Or maybe she was, and I'd just been too blind to see it. "Fine, Sarah," I said, my voice unexpectedly calm. "You've made your choice clear. If that's how you feel, there's nothing left to talk about. Go be with Jules, or whoever else you need to feel alive." She blinked, surprised by the steadiness in my voice, by my refusal to give her the explosive ending she seemed to want. "So, that's it? You're just going to give up? Walk away?" She looked at me like she'd won some twisted game. "No," I said quietly, shaking my head. "You already did that. I'm just finishing what you started." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. A small, fleeting glimpse of regret, or maybe surprise that I wasn't falling apart. But then, with a slight shrug, she turned and walked toward the door. She paused with her hand on the knob, glancing back at me one last time. "I hope you find whatever you're looking for, Tom." And then, without waiting for a reply, she stepped out, closing the door behind her with a finality that left the silence ringing in my ears. I stood there, staring at the closed door, feeling a strange mixture of loss and freedom. The weight of everything settled in, the hollow ache of betrayal, the sting of her cold words. But beneath it all, there was something else, a clarity, a quiet resolve. She was gone, and I was finally free to find my own path forward, without her lies and without the empty promises I'd once clung to. The end hurt, yes, but it also felt like a new beginning, a way to rebuild something real. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. After Sarah left, the house felt like an echo chamber. Every room, every familiar corner suddenly felt too quiet, too empty. I could still picture her things scattered throughout, her scent lingering faintly in the air, like she'd left some trace of herself to haunt me. But I was done letting her presence control me. I needed a plan, a way to move forward without her shadow hanging over everything. First, I went through our shared spaces, clearing out anything of hers that she'd left behind. Her favorite mug in the kitchen, the blanket she always curled up with on the couch, the photos of us on vacation that I'd loved looking at for years, they all went into a box. It was as if each object had become tainted, a reminder of the lies and betrayal I hadn't seen coming. As I boxed up her things, I found myself staring at one particular photo. The two of us on a beach, smiling, arms wrapped around each other like we had the world at our feet. I remembered the day vividly. It was one of those rare trips where everything had felt right. Looking at it now, though, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was just a beautiful illusion, a snapshot of a life I'd thought was real. And now, knowing what I did, that version of Sarah, the one in my arms, laughing, happy, felt like a stranger. Once I'd packed everything up, I called a close friend, Mark, someone I hadn't confided in yet. He'd always been there, the steady voice of reason who never missed a beat. When he answered, I kept it brief. telling him only that Sarah and I were done, and I needed somewhere to crash for a few days. He didn't press for details, just told me to come by whenever I was ready. I appreciated that. Right now, I didn't have the energy to explain everything. As I drove over to his place, it hit me. This was the beginning of a new chapter, whether I wanted it or not. I didn't know what that would look like yet, didn't know how I'd rebuild from here. But I was certain of one thing: I wouldn't let Sarah's betrayal define me. When I arrived at Mark's, he was waiting at the door, offering a silent hug that said more than words could. He poured me a drink, and we sat down in the living room, surrounded by the familiar comfort of friendship, something solid and real in a world that had been shaken to its core. After a few sips, he finally broke the silence. "So," he said, his voice calm but curious, "you want to talk about it?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything I'd held in for the last few days. "She cheated on me," I said simply. "I caught her last night, saw her with the guy, and when I confronted her, she didn't even try to deny it. She just walked away." Mark's face hardened, and he let out a long breath. "Man, I don't know what to say. I can't believe it. You two seemed solid?" "Yeah, that's what I thought too." I shook my head, the reality of it still sinking in. "Turns out, I didn't know her as well as I thought I did." Mark was quiet for a moment, then he nodded slowly.
I'm sorry, Tom.
"Really? I know there's nothing I can say that'll make this easier, but just know you're not alone in this." We talked late into the night, the hours slipping by as we hashed over every detail, every suspicion I'd ignored, every sign I'd missed. He listened without judgment, offering small insights and support, and little by little, I felt the fog of betrayal lifting. It didn't erase the pain, but it reminded me that I had people in my corner, people who genuinely cared about me. As the night wore on, I realized something I hadn't felt before. A spark of resolve, a determination to reclaim my life. Yes, Sarah had betrayed me, and yes, I'd have to live with the scars of that. But I didn't have to let it break me. That night, for the first time in what felt like forever, I went to sleep feeling a strange sense of peace. I wasn't over it, not by a long shot, but I knew I'd survive this. I'd find a way to move on. And as I drifted off, I promised myself that I'd rebuild, one step at a time, without her lies holding me back. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. For the first time, my mind wasn't consumed by thoughts of Sarah. It was still raw, yes, but there was also a strange sense of relief now that I'd pulled back the curtain on all her lies. It was like ripping off a bandage, painful but necessary to finally start healing. Mark handed me a cup of coffee as I settled into the kitchen. He looked me over with a raised brow. "You look better," he said, clearly surprised. "Not good, but like a weight's been lifted." I managed a small laugh. "It has," I admitted. "She's gone. All the lies, they're gone too. I think in some twisted way that's actually helping." Mark nodded, sipping his coffee, then leaned forward with a look in his eyes that told me he had something on his mind. "Look, Tom, I didn't want to bring this up last night when things were fresh, but there's something I think you should know." I braced myself. "What is it?" He glanced down, hesitating for a moment. "A few weeks back, I ran into Sarah downtown. She was with a guy, tall, dark hair, looked like he was around our age. They were just walking, but I noticed how close they seemed. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I didn't mention it. But now, with everything you've told me, well, I thought it might mean something." My stomach tightened as he spoke, a familiar anger bubbling up. "Jules, that had to have been him. Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mark sighed. "I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to cause issues over nothing. Plus, I figured if there was something going on, you'd find out in your own time. I didn't know it would be like this." He set down his coffee, regret evident in his eyes. I couldn't blame him. He was only trying to look out for me, and honestly, I wasn't sure I'd have wanted to know that way. But hearing that she hadn't even been cautious about hiding it, that she was comfortable flaunting it around town, stung. She hadn't just betrayed me. She'd been careless, bold, as if she didn't think I'd ever be smart enough to catch on. "Thanks for telling me," I said quietly, my hands clenched around my coffee mug. "I just can't believe she was so careless." Mark shook his head, sympathy and anger mixing in his gaze. It's not your fault, Tom. People like that, they want to get caught. They have to live with the thrill or it's not worth it for them. She played you, but you're the one who's going to come out of this stronger. I nodded, feeling a small spark of that resolve return. He was right. Whatever Sarah's twisted motivations had been, I was done letting her control the narrative. It was time to take back that power she chipped away at, to stop letting her lies define me. With that thought in mind, I made a decision. I need to get back to the house, I said, standing up. I want to clear out the rest of her things. I'm not letting her take up space in my life anymore. Mark gave me a look of approval. Want company? I shook my head. Thanks, but I think I need to do this alone. The drive back was almost surreal. I pulled into the driveway, steeling myself for the task ahead. But as soon as I stepped into the house, I felt a surge of energy, a determination I hadn't expected. I went from room to room, collecting every trace of her. A slow but liberating purge. Her clothes, her shoes, the books she'd insisted on stacking in the living room. Each item went into boxes with a finality that felt strangely satisfying. Then, as I was packing up the last of her things in the bedroom, I noticed something wedged behind the dresser. A small, leather-bound notebook. Curious, I opened it, and as I flipped through the pages, my heart pounded. It was a journal full of brief, scattered notes, appointments, reminders, and what looked like small to-do lists. But as I scanned the pages, something caught my eye. On one page, in her careful handwriting, was a list of dates and locations, each one aligned with a day she'd told me she'd been working late or going out with friends, the places she'd met him. Little notes next to each date, things like J favorite restaurant and long walk at the park. She'd documented each lie, each betrayal, like it was some twisted memoir she wanted to hold on to. A strange calm settled over me as I closed the journal and placed it in the last box. It was done. Her things were packed, her presence erased from the house. I'd found the last piece of her deception, and instead of the crushing grief I'd expected, I felt an unexpected surge of relief. The house felt lighter, almost as if it could breathe again. And as I stood there, looking over the boxes ready to be moved out, I realized that so could I. With Sarah's things packed up and out of the house, I felt a new sense of control, one that had been missing for months, maybe years. But there was one last step left, one final goodbye that I couldn't avoid. I knew that the moment I returned that journal, there was no need to keep any of it. I'd already taken photos of the entries I might need if things got complicated in the future, but otherwise, I was ready to let her lies walk out of my life. So, I sent her a single text. Your things are packed and ready. Come pick them up tonight. Her reply was immediate, almost as if she'd been expecting it. Fine. Be there around 7. I spent the hours leading up to her arrival sitting alone in the house, thinking about what I would say. This wasn't about trying to hurt her or demand apologies. It was about ending this on my terms, without her excuses, without her power games. By 7 o'clock, I felt ready, almost numb to whatever would come next. The knock on the door came exactly on time, and I opened it to find her standing there, looking as composed as ever. She had that same cool, unreadable expression, the one I'd once thought was confidence but now recognized as something else entirely. A mask. She glanced past me into the house, her eyes flickering with some unreadable emotion as she took it in. The blank spaces where her things had been, like she was taking one last look at the life she'd chosen to throw away. Where are the boxes? She asked, her tone clipped, businesslike. I gestured to the corner of the room, where I'd stacked them up. She walked over, silently inspecting each one, as if she were somehow above all of this. But then her eyes landed on the small leather notebook sitting on top of the pile, and her face tightened. For the first time, her mask slipped, and I saw a flicker of guilt or something close to it. I couldn't help myself. I found your journal, Sarah, I said quietly, my voice calm. You kept a detailed record of every lie, every time you met him. It was all right there, in your own handwriting. She looked up at me, her face going pale, and for a moment, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words seemed to get caught, lost in her throat. She knew there was nothing she could say, no way to spin this now. Why? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. I didn't expect a real answer, but somehow, I needed to hear it from her, even if it wouldn't change anything. She took a deep breath, finally looking me in the eye. "I don't know, Tom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt trapped. I wanted something else. Something else. I repeated, feeling a strange sense of detachment. "You mean someone else?" She nodded slowly, looking down at her hands. "Maybe. I don't know. I didn't think it would go this far." I gave a small, bitter laugh. "That's the thing, Sarah, you made a choice. Every time you met him, every time you lied, every time you came home and pretended nothing was wrong, you chose to keep going. You could have been honest with me, but instead, you documented every lie like it was some personal achievement." I shook my head. "That's who you are now, and that's what I'm letting go of tonight." She looked at me, and I could see a flash of something close to regret, or maybe shame. "I never wanted to hurt you, Tom." "But you did," I replied, my voice steady. "And you hurt yourself too, even if you don't see it yet. Maybe one day you'll realize what you lost. Or maybe you won't. Either way, it's not my problem anymore." She nodded, looking down, her silence saying more than any excuse she could have given me. She picked up the first box, pausing for a moment as if she wanted to say something else, to offer some last attempt at closure. But whatever words she might have had, she kept them to herself. She carried the box out to her car, then returned for the others, moving in and out of the house until the corner was empty. Finally, she stood at the door, looking back at me one last time. I felt a strange calm settle over me, like the last piece of this chapter was finally falling into place. "Goodbye, Tom," she said softly. "Goodbye, Sarah," I replied, holding her gaze for a moment before turning away. I didn't watch her walk out. I didn't need to. The door clicked shut behind her, and with that sound, the last of her presence, her lies, her betrayal, all of it was gone. I stood in the silence, letting it wash over me. I hadn't expected to feel this way, this clear, this free. The weight of her deceit was finally gone, leaving behind only what mattered, me, my own life, my own choices. And in that moment, I realized that, for the first time in a long time, I was ready to move forward. The silence that filled the house after Sarah left was unlike anything I'd felt before. It was deep, almost palpable, yet it didn't feel empty. Felt clean. There was no longer the heaviness of mistrust lurking in the walls, no secrets hiding in plain sight, just the quiet of a new beginning. And as I stood there in that silence, I felt a surprising sense of lightness. I didn't expect that sense of freedom to hit so soon, but it was there, calm and certain, lifting something heavy I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. I knew this was only the beginning and that the real work would be in rebuilding myself, one step at a time, without her, without the weight of her lies. But standing there, it felt like I was looking at the foundation of something new, something that had been waiting for me to claim it. Over the next few days, I settled into a routine, a new kind of normal. It was simple things at first. Cleaning, organizing, filling the empty spaces she'd left behind. The bedroom felt different now, lighter. I rearranged the furniture, put up new sheets, even changed the art on the walls. Each small change felt like reclaiming a little more of the life I wanted to create. I spent evenings reconnecting with old friends, catching up on parts of my life I'd let fall to the wayside. I found myself reaching out to people I hadn't spoken to in months, even years, and the warmth of their responses reminded me that there was a world of connections beyond the broken one I just left behind. Then, one night, Mark invited me to a small get-together he was hosting, just a casual evening with a few mutual friends. I almost declined, feeling hesitant about jumping back into a social setting. But something in me knew it was time to start living again, even if it felt unfamiliar.